Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of What Do You Call It podcast. I'm your host, GB. Today's guest is a passionate wrestling fan and the author of the upcoming book, Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldogs. Please give it up for Stephen Bell. How you doing today, mate? You all right?
I'm great, George. Thanks for having me, man.
Not a problem at all, mate. I'm glad that you got in touch and communicated. We was actually supposed to do this originally a bit earlier, but things come up. But thank you for coming on. We're going to talk about your book, your upcoming book, you being an author, and just how you became a wrestling fan. So before we do discuss the upcoming book, how long have you actually been a wrestling fan?
Well, it's been a bit of a on and off thing really throughout my life. I was sort of mid-30s, so if you trace that back, it's not hard to figure out that our sort of prime childhood years when Vince McMahon sort of targeted that era, especially here in the UK, largely through Davey, using Davey as the sort of face of his British onslaught and takeover of the British wrestling business, if you like, after he'd conquered the US.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I grew up, me and my friends and my brother, knowing nothing but Hulk Hogan and Davey and Bret and that sort of era, Ultimate Warrior.
The golden era.
The golden era, the time when it really sort of piped it into that generation, if you like. And yeah, absolutely, hook, line and sinker. Loved it, loved every single second of it. And then, as I think happened, the WWF in particular went through a tough period as WCW sort of took over a little bit in the mid-90s, and that coincided with my generation sort of growing out of wrestling a little bit, thinking that we were a little bit too smart for it then, and finding other things. I'm really big on my football, my boxing, but I got into that sort of stuff then. And then obviously a few years later, the Attitude Era came along, and I was a teenage boy then, and what else does a teenage boy want other than Stone Cold and The Rock and Trish Stratus? So so it sort of really piqued my fandom. Then me and my brother got back into it in a big way, I remember, and one of his friends had never actually made the mistake of thinking he was too cool for wrestling in that mid-90s period, and he'd actually carried on his fandom the whole way through, so much so he'd curated a big collection of all the old VHSs, all the pay-per-views going all the way back to WrestleMania 1. So when myself and my brother got back into wrestling in a big way, we sort of wanted to catch up on everything that we'd missed and more. We wanted to go all the way back. So we were bringing sort of as the carrier bags back, I remember, of all his VHSs at a time, 10 or 12.
Silver Vision, man.
And working his way through it. I remember every night when we got off from school, we'd work through a couple of pay-per-views.
Yeah.
And that's when actually I sort of started to tie in Dynamite into what I knew about Davey. And obviously by then I was sort of 15, 16-year-old, a bit more socially aware, geographically aware. I'd become aware that Davey Boy was actually from just up the road from me, far less than an hour's drive, from a similar sort of small mining town as what I'm from. So then when I discovered the British Bulldogs, rather than just the British Bulldog singular, as I'd only known sort of in my childhood, I sort of started asking myself a few questions, did a bit of research into who exactly Tom Billett and what, and that sort of coincided with Mick Foley's book coming out. Mick Foley, Dynamite's on Mick Foley's Mount Rushmore, and it puts him over in his book in a big way as being sort of probably the best in the world in the mid-80s when he first came across him. And so that sort of piqued me interest even more. Started doing a little bit of research then. I was nowhere close to being an author back then. It was just really sort of a passion of mine to sort of dig into these stories. And so, yeah, that's like 20 years ago now. And then slowly as time went on, me and my brother stayed big wrestling fans. It was like something that we use not just as interest for ourselves individually, but something that we really had in common. The main thing that we really had in common, it forged us to be closer in as later years after we'd not been that close as kids, really. So yeah, it was something that we had and still do have in common in a big way. And yeah, so then it went into 2000s. Davey unfortunately passed away, and it's like one of them, a bit like the mention with I think the two main ones that spring to mind is Princess Diana or Freddie Mercury, where you remember where you were when you were the news, and I do remember exactly where I was when I heard that David Bowie died. And it really,
he was so young as well. He was only, what, 39?
39, yeah. And, it shook me up quite a lot, really, because I'd only ever sort of seen him as this ultra fit superhero type figure. So then that forced me to sort of do a little bit more research into, why, and then sort of I became aware of all the other wrestler deaths that were happening around the same time with similar issues, things like that. So, yeah, I just sort of accidentally stumbled across this minefield of a story that I felt had originated from just around the corner from me. It were happening on a global scale right in front of me. It involved so much of my peak fandom, my wrestling fandom, going back to when I was a child and also at the time then. And then, so sort of 15 to 20 years later, when I became a sports author, it was sort of there in the back of my mind all the time that I knew that there was a story in there. And in the meantime, Bret Hart had brought his book out, which is actually one of my sort of top 5 favourite books.
It's my favourite wrestling book, by the way.
Yeah, it's my favourite wrestling.
I've probably read it like 2 or 3 times. I actually met him when he just released it at a book signing, even though it's 4 hours late. But the book is so good, except for the last 2 pages. I won't spoil it if anyone's not read it, but if you've read it, you know what I mean.
Yeah, that is true. But that's just so Bret, isn't it?
He couldn't help himself.
You could tell he poured his heart and soul into the whole thing, and left absolutely nothing out there. Like, it's 500 or 600 pages long, where most of these wrestling memoirs are
200-300 pages.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but it took me less time to read Bret's than it did one of the 200 or 300 page ones, because I was just so absorbed into it. I found myself, even while I was just putting kettle on in the morning to make myself a cup of tea before I went to work, I'd ram 2 or 3 pages on, because literally, the old saying of you can't put a book down. I actually found I couldn't put that book down, and that put so much sort of meat on the bones of the Dynamite and Davey story for me, I found myself doing more of my own research and everything like that point. And again, that's still just sort of leading up to me being in a position where I found myself a few years later being a successful and published sports author, and nobody had sort of done it yet. And I just thought, right, I think it's time somebody did it, and unbelievably, it's me.
I am looking forward to pre-ordering it and when it comes out, but there's a lot to talk about in your journey and some things that I want to sort of go back on. As you mentioned before, wrestling not being your only sport, that you're actually into football and boxing. I've got to ask, because if you have listened to my previous episodes, if I discover someone's a football fan, I've just got to know, what team do you support?
I'm a United fan. That was born out of a little bit like, obviously you can tell I've got a northern voice, but I in that early 90s period, at the same time that I was sort of obsessed with WWF and what they were all bringing to the table, or got a little bit obsessed with what Alex Ferguson and Eric Cantona and Ryan Giggs and Cam Chelskis and all them were bringing to the table. So I quickly aligned myself there. It weren't a difficult decision to make. There were no major football club within 10 or 15 mile of me, so there were no sort of immediate obvious allegiances. And when there were sort of the Harlem Globetrotters at the time, it was a pretty easy decision to make. Bona fide glory sport, I'm afraid.
Yeah, at least you're honest about it. I mean, have you at least been to Old Trafford?
Oh God, yeah, many times, yeah.
You're fine then, because I know there's so many United fans I know in the South that have never even stepped foot in Manchester, yet alone Old Trafford. So not a problem at all. I completely understand. I'm an Arsenal fan, but I've always got a soft spot for United. More United's past achievements and the rivalry that was between Arsenal and Man United, Arsene Wenger and Alex Ferguson. Like, we're never going to see those days again. We're playing each other on
it's
Thursday.
Funny to say that, George, because I genuinely believe, and I've spoken about this quite a lot. I write and go on podcasts for these football times, and it's something that I've talked about quite passionately. That I don't think football will ever be the same again. And I think that rivalry will kind of where football peaked. I know everybody sort of thinks that their era were the best, but I think it's where we had this perfect combination of foreign talent coming in, the best foreign talent coming in from your own point of view. You've got Bergkamp and Henry and them sort of players. Yeah,
but they weren't playing for themselves. They were playing for the team. They weren't playing for the wages.
Exactly. There weren't mercenaries like we have now. And same at United. Fantastic foreign imports. So Alex Ferguson were bringing in to fill particular points in his team and building his team around them. You like Cantona and Van Nistelrooy, Ronaldo eventually, and I do think that era. I do think that Roman Abramovich and then Mourinho coming in at Chelsea was almost the beginning of the end of English football for me, because that is when it ultimately just turned into a game of Monopoly rather than a game of football, I think.
No, I understand that, and I don't want to like piss off some of the listeners because I think some people won't agree, but that's because they're probably younger. But I do agree with you. Like football has peaked, and maybe because we're getting old, I don't know. Like you said, everyone's got their favourite periods of time, or whatever. But I honestly agree. Like, just tell me, have you seen the same passion that was seen in the Arsenal and Man United games from 15, 16 years ago? I'm sorry, but that's not been replicated at all.
Not even close. Not even close. You were glued. You were glued to every single second of them games, because you never knew what were going to happen next. What bit of magic, footballing magic, might come up? What bit of sliding tackle and then some retribution further down line? You just never knew.
Keown screaming in the face, like Van Nistelrooy literally hitting the crossbar.
It just feels like they're going through emotions a little bit now.
And then Keown, Vieira, like, and the things that they respect each other so now. Like, I think you can watch them talking about like their like the moments, the memories on YouTube, and it's just brilliant, man. It's that passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think as a fan, when you see players just going through emotion, a bit, same as with wrestling. I think it's same with wrestling. When you see them just going through the motions, you yourself sort of switch off, and you gain that mentality off them that you're not quite fully engaged, because you don't feel like they're fully engaged, if you know what I mean. But yeah, as you say, it's each of their own, and I think there's probably is a little bit of nostalgia and roasting glass and all that going on. I have no doubt about that. Like I said, I was still a sort of teenager, or my early 20s at the time when all that was going on, and it just feels like looking back that was the peak of my sort of football fandom and football obsession. That period.
I still love the game, but I do think you're right. There is one thing I want to know as well, just before I talk about how you became an author and a writer, because I know you've touched on that briefly. I actually want to just quickly ask, it's probably going to be an obvious answer, but I've got to know, what is your favourite British Bulldog match? And what is your favourite British Bulldogs match?
Right, okay. The favourite British Bulldog match, I'm gonna give you two, just because I feel like you probably want a singles one where you're saying that as in a singles, and that is, I would say, it's him versus Bret, but not SummerSlam 92.
In your house, December.
In your house, December 95. Yes, absolutely. It's everybody remembers SummerSlam 92 for various reasons. It's a wonderful, magical, amazing match, but it's even more of a wonderful, magical, amazing spectacle. In terms of a purely wrestling match, in terms of you've got a babyface, you've got a heel, you've got the rollback.
80,000 people there, Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That sort of, even though the match is amazing,
Dying, Hart crying.
The spectacle almost gives you an emotional investment. That brings the match up above what it actually was, even though it was fantastic. The In Your House match that they had in December 95 with the WWF title on the line, they deliberately, you can tell, and from doing all my research that I've done and knowing exactly where they were in their friendship, family life, determination to be at the top and stay at the top. At that time, blading war completely embargoed, so they sort of did it and they did the best job of ever covering up Blade. And if you're looking at, because they knew they had to, because it was so embargoed on such a high level, but they knew they wanted to roll back the years to when blading was so.
Bret was one of the best at that. Like we did it against
absolutely.
Piper.
He had the perfect hairdo, especially when it was wet. You know, to sort of give himself that opportunity.
Never got caught.
No, but because they had some fantastic matches back in Stampede when that's what they used to do, and their matches were like sort of barbaric and brilliant, and they really knew how to time the blading job, and they knew how to really get the crowd going to fever pitch. And once I'd done all that research, and then I watched that match, I'd seen it 2 or 3 times before, don't get me wrong, but when you watch that match, then knowing what they're doing, why they're doing it, yeah, it's an absolute work of art, is that match. David Boy, rarely as an heel throughout his career, does a great job. It gives him a better job than in '92 of sort of being the foil for Bret, who was the main man at the time. But what another thing that I love on David's part is both him and Bret agree that there's no need for him to submit to Sharpshooter. He never submitted to Sharpshooter like everybody else did. And he walks off, despite being a heel, he walks off with the kind of a babyface reaction, walking off with Diana. You can tell that even though he's an heel at the time, the crowd still love him, everybody still loves him.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a perfect sort of little emotional story that they tell that day. The other one, the reason I'm going to put this one in is it's my favourite match that I think I was ever involved with, but obviously it's sort of a 10-man tag, so I didn't want to put it in as my favourite.
Canadian Stampede.
Absolutely. That is the ultimate air on the back of the head. Like
that is literally top 5 pay-per-views of all time for me, by the way.
I think it's got to be. I think, yeah, at the very least. And purely just because of that match, the reactions, the timing of it, the emotional involvement, it is the perfect piece of wrestling storytelling for me. That culminates arguably, you could say, I mean, as brilliant as the match is and what happens at the match and the ending, and it's all great. That story between the Hart Foundation and the heel turn and them coming together, all the infighting, but they brought them together. Everybody wanted to see them together, but they probably wanted to see them together as baby faces. But the fact that they were together as heels didn't matter in Canada. They just absolutely loved the fact that they were together.
The fans were erupting, literally. It was shaking the camera.
It is. And as it's building up, you get Pillman comes out first, really, as kind of only he's capable of doing, really brings the crowd up to fever pitch. And then it's Jim Neidhart gets the biggest reaction he probably ever has in his life, because he didn't walk out as a solo star much to bring him out on his own. Gets this amazing reaction, and then it's Bulldog gets one of the best reactions of his life. He comes out and he's got at least one. He's probably got 2 belts at the time. I'm trying to think back, he's got Diana.
European tag, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then Owen comes out with his slammers and stuff like that. You could just feel the electricity. And then when Bret, the guitar riffs from Bret's music, I think it is I mean, I've been to sporting events all over the world, the biggest sporting events all over the world. I weren't there, but as feeling it through sort of osmosis through TV, I think that is possibly the most electrified sports crowd that there's quite possibly ever been. Like the place is shaking, literally shaking, and that will always be sort of my favourite. I think my favourite match that involves Davey. I think that will always be that.
That's a good answer, because I don't necessarily hear that all the time. It is mostly Wembley '92. It's the most popular answer you hear.
Yeah, and I can see why, because of it's the spectacle as well. The homecoming, the brilliant storytelling in that, with, as you say, with Diana, and the fact that they've got this infight in both baby faces of the Intercontinental title. And yeah, it is a perfect story. I just think it's I think the fact that both baby faces obviously limits what they can do in terms of underhand tactics and all that, which everybody likes to see throughout a wrestling match, and it's part of the story building. So yeah, I just think that as a singles match, for me, the In Your House just slightly pips that one. And then the Canadian Stampede just purely for the unique, like even the emotional investment everybody had at SummerSlam '92. probably pick out other singles matches with other people that have had that level of, you know, your sort of Rock and Austin matches and these one-on-one matches that have had that level of anticipation and crowd support. But the In Your House Canadian Stampede, I don't think there has ever been, for me, I've never seen a wrestling match with that level of just pure emotion and pure investment from a crowd, and that will
the
always
entire crowd as well. It'll be hard to find anything that tops it. I mean, if there's anyone listening to this right now and you haven't seen this pay-per-view, to forget the match itself, just the entire pay-per-view, go to the network, find it on there. Canadian Stampede, In Your House, 1997. It is fantastic. Honestly, it's one of the best pay-per-views you ever see.
Absolutely, it feels like I think during the show as well, it's almost like a mini WrestleMania, like a Calgary WrestleMania, where the show, all the Hart family, and obviously David Bowie being heavily involved in that. The show I'm doing this sort of tour along with the Calgary Stampede that's actually on at the time, the rodeo that the pay-per-view was named after. That's all on at the time, and it shows there's like, I'm picking a number out of thin air, but it's probably not far off being right from my research, as I remember. Like 100,000 fans snaking around the city just to get a glimpse of them, to get autographed 8x10s,
awesome.
things like that. And they all got one that stayed there until midnight and whatever to make sure everybody got away with the signed
actual
merchandise.
rock stars in Calgary.
And yeah, it turns into this sort of mini Canadian WrestleMania that culminates in this one match where the rest certainly to the US fans, the Hart Foundation heels, but it's this unique situation that they managed to create through this storytelling and performances of the guys individually, where you had this red hot babyface heat behind them in Canada and this red hot red hot heel hatred for them in the US, and it just culminates on that night, and it is amazing.
Oh, it's fantastic, mate. I mean, one last thing to mention before we move on from the best match category and talk. There is one match I think doesn't get necessarily talked about enough. British Bulldog, Owen Hart, European title.
Absolutely. I cover it heavily in the book. With the other matches that we mentioned, I knew, even before I started my research for the book, I knew them matches all quite well, or I remembered them. I knew that Davey Boy had won the European title at a tournament in Europe, and I knew that he'd beat Owen in the final. That were all I knew. I'd never actually seen the match. So obviously I made a point of going and viewing it when I got to that point of the story. What an amazing little match it is. Like, you can see that he made this decision to have this ultra technical match in Europe where they blend all these styles together. Probably wouldn't have been given the time or the space to do it on American TV or an American pay-per-view. They've obviously just been given the freedom to go and do what they want, and they create this almost like perfect technical wrestling match where it also involves the storytelling of them as brothers-in-law and tag team champions together, who were sort of a little bit of a jealousy brother mentality going on. And yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. I would, as you've just said for that last one, I would implore anybody who wants seen it to go and watch it.
Highly recommend that match. So I want to talk about you being an author. I actually want to discover, when did you know that you wanted to become an author and a writer?
Well, it's been something that goes back an awful long way with me. I mean, I know, like, as a teenager, I was great at all English, got A stars in English at school, and I went into engineering as my career. Never really give anything like journalism or anything a real chance to embed itself in me. And then as years went on, I sort of regretted that. I found myself being so obsessed with sports, still know that I'd got this storytelling and writing ability, that I kind of thought I'd missed my calling in life, and sports journalism is probably what I should have done. And that went on years and years, and don't get me wrong, engineering served me well, it's given me a good grounding, a good standard of living, but I still had this sort of feeling that I'd missed my calling in life a little bit. And in 2014, I went to Brazil for 6 weeks for the World Cup. England were only there for 2 weeks, but I was there for 6. And I fell in love with Brazil, fell in love with Brazilian football, fell in love with the people. And I came home, and a couple of years later, I don't know if you know much about it, but the Brazilian football team, Chapecoense, had a terrible plane crash where most of the team died.
Yeah, yeah, that's
It sort of
horrible.
appeared on our media for literally a few days, and they completely disappeared off it. But because I'd got one friend in particular who we're in regular contact with in Brazil, I got a little bit hooked on the story, and I was asking him to send me his own Brazilian media stuff, you know, and he was translating me stuff and sending me YouTube news feeds with he were putting English subtitles on me for him, bless him. And so over a few months, I accidentally became a little bit of a English speaking expert on the subject, I think. And I were really sort of digging deep on it and finding out more and more, but not just about the accident and the crash, but the backstory that this team, the Chapecoense, 10 years earlier, they were effectively the Brazilian version of non-league, and they'd gone on this amazing, mind-boggling run of promotions and scraping through every single division and playoffs and avoiding relegations and then scraping promotion the following year. And this real underdog story, and a lot of them same players had been playing in non-league. It weren't like they were spending a lot of money and refreshing the roster every single season. There were a lot of the players, same players who've been in non-league and stayed with them all the way through. And then they'd qualified for the South American version of the Europa League final, like just unbelievably, like one of the craziest underdog stories in history of sport. And on the way to the away leg, they have their finals and a home and away leg. On the way to the away first leg, the plane crashed for truly criminal reasons. Like, it literally ran out of fuel because the airline were cutting corners. And I got so hooked on that story that I thought, well, I'm going to pull all this together, this sort of bit of burning desire that I'd got to do some sports writing at some point in my life. And this story that I'd managed to end up being this sort of accidentally be this expert on, that I'll pull this together and write a book about it, not really knowing where I was going to go with it. And got halfway through and decided to send what I'd done so far into Pitch Publishing, who are the UK's biggest sports book publisher. And they loved it, and they said they'd do it, and it did really well. It was really well received. That led to me sort of writing, as I said, for These Football Times and appearing on podcasts for them. And then at that point, the wrestling fandom was sort of a little bit down again. I weren't really into wrestling on a weekly basis or anything like that at that point. But I discovered this story. I live in Huddersfield now, and one of Huddersfield's greatest sons is a gentleman called Douglas Clark. He was a pioneer of rugby league. He was one of the first true rugby league superstars for Great Britain and England and Huddersfield. Won everything there was to win before he were in his sort of mid-20s, and then World War One. He went off to World War One and was a bona fide war hero. Came back with every medal under the sun, and he was, I don't know if you've seen the film Hacksaw Ridge, but he was like Britain's version of Hacksaw Ridge. You just kept running back into the line of fire to rescue.
That's a great film, by the way.
Yeah. Well, literally, when I've read his war diaries. I went to Imperial War Museum and read Douglas Clark's war diaries, and it literally reads like he was doing what Hacksaw Ridge were doing. He was just running back in because he'd got this level of strength and fitness from his rugby life. He was just running back into no man's land and back into enemy lines to save his friends and drag them back out. And he talks about some of them that he didn't manage to save. And it's truly harrowing. And then after that, he got given a 20% disability certificate and told that he could never do anything too strenuous again. But that was he found himself bored, so he decided he thought he was fit enough to go back to rugby. He signed back on with Huddersfield, had a sort of second Hall of Fame rugby career, played for England all over again, played for Great Britain Lions all over again, won everything all over again. And when he finally hung up his rugby boots, he went into pro wrestling. And in 1930, when pro wrestling had just truly hit British shores, he went into pro wrestling and was Britain's first ever world heavyweight champion. So that sort of piqued me interest again in pro wrestling, doing loads of research, reading loads of biographies from around that time. And so I did his biography. At this point, I started to realise, wow, I'm actually a published author, and I've still got the Bulldog story sort of swirling around in my mind from all my fandom and all my interest in it going back years and years. And I sort of still didn't feel like I was qualified as sort of the man to do it. But then on Remembrance Day last year, loads of the Douglas Clark book had done so well that a lot of the national press ran with it as a front page story, as the Remembrance sort of Day war hero story. They ran with
That's awesome. Yeah.
extracts out of my book, and that made the book kick on and do really well, and it got so fantastically well received, and I got loads of brilliant feedback that it sort of made me realise that I probably am now qualified to, and I certainly felt like I'd got the passion and the energy to pour everything into the Bulldogs book. So I made that decision there and then to sort of really crack on with it, and so sort of 13 months down the line now, it's off with the 500-page manuscript is off with Pitch Publishing getting edited now. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. As you have told us how you began the journey, but can you just talk us through it? So the book itself, Dynamite and Davey, The Explosive Lives of the British Bulldogs. So in terms of who have you contacted in terms of getting some insight on both their careers and their backgrounds and information? So I just want to hear some of your research and the process that's gone into this book.
Yeah, well, it's happened so organically. It's ended up being bigger and better. Like I said, I didn't anticipate writing a 500-page epic. At the start, it was just going to be, because being from a small mining town in the north of England, just like Dynamite and Davey were, I wanted the stories individually. The stories never really been told collectively of Dynamite and Davey. Both of the stories have been told in bits and parts and pieces of them individually, but the true relationship as cousins from a small mining town and the background that I knew that had, an heritage that I felt like I sort of shared with them. I wanted to make sure I brought it from that perspective, because I feel like they're possibly a bit misunderstood, especially with a lot of the controversies that happened, especially for Dynamite. I think
which can be seen on like the Dark Side of the Ring. I feel they kind of balanced it, but I
think they did the best to balance it. But I mean, at the end of the day, the show is called Dark Side of the Ring, and they've only got they end up with 44 minutes of content. What can you truly do? They've got to have the majority of it's got to be based on the dark side for it to justify its name, if you like. And what does that leave? That leaves you with 13 or 14 minutes to sort of balance things out. And I just didn't feel like that were enough to add the proper context. And I think what people don't understand is that in them days, like my father were a miner, and he were born only a couple of months apart from Tom. So, and I've heard all my life is these stories of how hard it was, the upbringing, they never, their idea of an holiday were Blackpool for a few days and stuff like that, So Tom and then Davey a couple of years later going off to Canada to live and work as teenagers. I don't think it's ever really been thought of from that perspective of how sort of frightening and harrowing that might have been for them at that time. And
absolutely, like you're just young men.
Boys, so, and they made mistakes, but everybody makes mistakes in their life. So I wanted to sort of put it off from that point of view. So I'd got this idea in mind of where I wanted to tell the story and what angle I wanted to tell the story from. But as I was doing more and more research, it just got sort of bigger and better. And I want to focus on this bit. I want to focus on this bit. A lot of the Japanese stuff I really wanted to focus on. So what I thought from what I've just said there about how, as young lads, and certainly Tom being the first one to make that decision to go over to Canada, I really wanted that to be like sort of the first sort of arc in the story of sort of the sliding doors moment when he met Bruce Hart, as it were. Bruce Hart were over in 1977, just doing a sort of working tour. Stampede Wrestling were struggling and about to close down, and he were going to go and find another career, but he just thought he'd see a bit of world and use his profession as a wrestler to sort of see a bit of world. So he came over to the UK and did a tour for Max Crabtree and Joint Promotions, and he saw Dynamite wrestle, and at that time in Stampede and most of US territories, it was the land of the giants, and only sort of big heavyweights could headline. But he saw Tom wrestle as a 170-pound lightweight teenager against Mark Rocco, absolutely tear the house down, and thought, wow, this is maybe what we need to make us a little bit unique, a little bit different from the other territories. And so yeah, he went home and sold this idea to his dad, Stu. Stu weren't keen. He didn't believe that a young skinny kid could save the territory. So it sort of got put on back burner, but it ended up happening. They ended up, they had nothing left to lose, and they ended up taking him over. So I wanted to speak to Bruce about that. So I reached out through sort of just social media, really, made a couple of contacts, and ended up getting in touch with Bruce and arranged a call. We had a wonderful 3 or 4 hour conversation. It was absolutely brilliant, hearing his perspective on everything, you know, not just Dynamite and David, but the wrestling industry as a whole. I really, really enjoyed speaking to him. And I think I must have made a reasonable impression in terms of what my intentions were, what my project were going to be, my passion and my energy, my knowledge, and everything must have come across quite well. Because a few days later, Ross Hart got in touch with me and said, look, I know I've heard about your book and about yourself. I'd like to contribute myself, and I were over the moon with that because I'd already knew from all my research that Ross was really kind of a historian on behalf of, you know, Stampede Wrestling, on behalf of the Hart family, on behalf of wrestling as a whole from that era. So I was really, really keen to speak to Ross. There were some parts of the story that he was so integral in as well. You know, Dave were involved in a really bad van crash on the way to a Stampede show. Ross were driving that day. Yeah, there were a few parts that he were really integral to. So this a 3 hour conversation with Ross, we didn't even feel like we touched sides. So we agreed to stay in regular contact by email. So we found ourselves, you know, exchanging long emails. I felt like I could ask him anything. I did. I just asked him anything about the subject, and he'd give me long, detailed answers. He really sort of got a passion for it, and became involved in more of a. He got more of an involvement than I ever thought he would, but it just happened organically to the point where, yeah, he was really heavily involved. And I felt like I'd got somebody to turn to all the time. That I'd already found myself some British wrestling historians, Tony Earnshaw and Darren Ward and Bradley Craig, who I could turn to for different things. And then I was speaking to Frank Cullen, who still lives out in Canada. He's a Scottish wrestler who knew Dynamite and Davey well, exchanging messages with him. So I just built up this little network where any points of research, I felt like I got somebody to turn to. I've subsequently spoken to, the key part missing from that is Bronwyn. I know you spoke to Bronwyn yourself, George.
Yeah.
Because it was going so well, Bronwyn, again, I'd sent Bronwyn some messages, but I think she must have maybe heard it all before and didn't really know what angle I was going to come from. But
yeah, I can understand being a bit skeptical.
I absolutely understand all the family members being cautious, definitely cautious, you know what. But I think Ross passed on the message to her and some other family members that, again, a bit like Bruce had passed on to him, that it was, I was coming at it from the right perspective and the right context. And so Bronwyn then reached out to me again and said, look, I'll be involved. So that me and Bronwyn we've ended up with a really close friendship. We exchange messages regular, and she has just been such a crucial source of information. Even things that she doesn't know, I can go and ask her. She'll go and ask her mum, Michelle. I've spoken to Michelle as well, but Michelle will pass on messages through Bronwyn. Bronwyn will go out and find out information on my behalf that I might not have access to, and she's given me loads of exclusive photos for the book. So
that's awesome, man.
Her and Ross being so passionate about the project and having such an every involvement. As I was working towards an ending, I thought, well, there's only, even as much as I tried, I wanted to write this perfect ending. I realised that I couldn't write the ending as well as I know Bronwyn could tell it. So I asked Bronwyn if she would actually write the final piece, which she's done. She's written what I've called the afterword, and that's by herself. And Ross, I wanted his name up front cover as well, so I asked him to write the foreword, which he's done. He's wrote this sort of long, brilliant foreword, saying that in his opinion, it's sort of the most balanced and best and most detailed version of the Bulldog story that's ever been told. And so one of the reasons I did that, as well as knowing that they'd write these brilliant pieces for me that would fit perfect as bookends at the beginning and the end. I wanted their names up front as well, you know, so now, you know, I'm obviously my name's emblazoned on it as the author, but it says forward by Ross Hart, afterward by Bronwyn Billiton, and I feel that gives it, it gives them the true level of involvement that they deserve. And then, yeah, I've spoken to Diana, Gary Port, Scott McGee, who are also on Dark Side of the Ring. He's told me a couple of brilliant anecdotes that weren't on Dark Side of the Ring, which is really great. Keith Hart has given me a true exclusive that's one of my favourite parts of the book, about when Tom and Harley Race became friends. They were there at the time. It's a brilliant story that sort of changes Tom's perspective at that time, I think, and so that's an important part, as well as being such an entertaining little story. And yeah, Bret, I got in touch with Bret through Bronwyn indirectly. She
did a part of you, by the way, like mark out a little bit, like?
Well, I did, because I haven't actually still spoke to him directly. What I did was he asked me through Bronwyn to write him a letter detailing what quotes of his I wanted to use, because I said, look, you know, as much as I'd love to speak to him, he's talked about it quite a lot in the past, and obviously releasing his 600-word book, he talks about everything so often. I don't know why Alexa's just started talking.
Shout out to Alexa.
Only me and Alice, but Alexa's just started talking.
I'll just keep this in, it's fine.
Yeah, I felt like I'd got all the quotes that I needed, as much as I'd like to have hear him say them to me as exclusives for the book. I did feel like I'd kind of got everything that I needed off him through all his podcast appearances and his book and things that he's done for Dave Meltzer's newsletter. But what I wanted from him was sort of a sign-off that I could use all these quotes, because there's only so many that you can use without formal permission, and I far bust that in terms of Bret. So I sent all the direct quotes and included sort of a one-pager about myself, about the book, what I wanted it to do, what I wanted it to achieve, what its objectives were. And yeah, he then asked me if I could send him the same thing back again, but with a definite line for him to sign and date on. And then he sent it back to me, signed and dated, and sort of wished me good luck through Bronwyn with it all. It sounded like a good project. So yeah,
that's so cool, man. By the way,
I did mark out a little bit. Yes, yeah, so I put my Hitman shirt on and had a little moment. So yeah, it kind of
awesome.
From where it originally started, I felt like it had really grown legs and ended up being bigger and better than what I ever dreamt it would be, in terms of the people that I got involved and people that I spoke to and the things that I found out. You know, I knew that there were a book in there just based on the things that I already knew, but I found out so much more, and so much more vital stuff, so much more very entertaining stuff, so much more positive stuff that doesn't get talked about as often. And yeah, it's ended up being a full body of work that I'm really proud of.
Just hearing this journey, man, has got me excited and made me look forward to one. I'm excited to read the book, basically. Just hearing is involved, hearing your passion, the excitement, like how much detail and how much, you know, how you've been exchanging emails and the contacts that you've kind of gained through this journey. It sounds like it's going to be a great book. I mean, I have to give a shout out also to Bronwyn, who I've had on the show before, and she is a fantastic person. I really enjoy speaking to her. It was great to hear about, you know, her dad's career, and just to hear about her as a person, and to hear that she's assisted you so much in this book. You know, just makes me happy. But that's fucking awesome, man. So what's the actual release date for the book?
The release date is 4th of April here in the UK, and then it's a couple of months later for the US. But I've set up a website, I've set up an eBay page, and I've set up a Twitter account, all for the book. So anybody from anywhere in the world can get in touch with me directly, or order on the website or through eBay, and I will make sure that they get a book wherever they are in the world in by the end of April. So regardless of what the sort of Amazon or official release date might be in that part of the world, if they order from me direct, I will personally make sure that they get that delivered to them by the end of April. So I wanted that really. I didn't want there to be this sort of discrepancy. I know that I've had so much feedback from the US and Canada, as you can understand. I didn't want them to sort of have to wait longer than everybody else. So I've sort of set all these extra mechanisms up for them to be able to order it.
Yeah, because I did see Bronwyn put that on her Twitter, saying, you know, if you are outside the UK, just sort of get in contact with me, and then obviously I can get the book.
Again, that would just because she's been so amazing throughout it all. She's got this sort of wonderful energy about her, and I really wanted her involved as well. And so I offered her the chance to almost be a little sort of a little sales business, if you like, out in Calgary. I know there'd be so much business out there for it in Calgary that I wanted her to be able to have be able to offer it out there. I know that a lot of people had turned to her asking where they could get it from. So I wanted her to have them sort of readily available on hand. So she's going to get a delivery of dozens and dozens of books direct from the publisher that she can then arrange sale of around Calgary and Canada.
No, awesome, man. It's quite funny you mentioned about Bronwyn sort of being a bit skeptical at first. She was kind of like that with me with the podcast because she probably gets asked all the time, and it just happened to be after the Dark Side of the Ring. But because I'd actually told her that I'd actually spoke to Georgia Smith before, and then she was like, "Oh, right, no, that's fine then, that's fine." And then, you know, talking about the podcast, ended up being a really good episode. So I thought I'd just share that sort of insight as well.
She's great. She's so chatty, and she's got this sort of bubbly energy about her. She's made fun. I know she does a little bit of indie wrestling as sort of a manager, and she's absolutely made for that kind of thing. I think she's got this presence about her and an energy that she's become quite popular, I think, on the wrestling podcast circuit, and you can see why she's so sort of giving with the time and giving with the knowledge, and
she's pretty open as well. Like, she knows what's said about her dad and stuff, but she also likes to hear the positive, like from Mick Foley. You know, when you ask him about Dynamite Kid, he will literally say, despite that match, I think it's on YouTube or Network, where Mick Foley has I think his first or second match in WWF in 86, 87, and he just gets knocked the fuck out basically by Dynamite. But he takes it with such honor, such pride. Like, yeah, I messed with Dynamite. It didn't end well, but yeah, that's great. And your dad's awesome. Like,
I spoke to Mick as well via messaging as well. He's give me a couple of little pointers in terms of.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, again, he's sort of great with his time and that. And he, as I say, Dynamite, he turned into good friends with Davey in the mid to late 90s. He had so much sort of love and respect for Davey from that era. And as a worker, and he absolutely adores Tom. As I said, Tom's on his Mount Rushmore. And then after that sort of infamous event when Tom felt that Mick was a little bit cocky for somebody in his second wrestling match, when he suggested a couple of spots that they might do in what were effectively a jobber match. Tom, didn't take any prisoners.
Put him in his place, basically.
Rock his jaw with a clothesline.
That was it.
Despite that, Mick almost wears that as a bit of a badge of honor. Knows that it learned him a lot about his attitude towards other veterans at the time. So almost thanks him for it in a way. And then years later, when Mick's career was taking off and Dynamite was on the way down, as it's not like he had this chip on his shoulder like you might expect Tom at all. He was very humble, very respectful, and give Mick some great pointers. They had some good matches. They were involved in good tag matches against each other in Japan in the early 90s, and they became sort of friends after all that, which is something that not a lot of people are aware of. And Mick has got this utmost respect for him to the point where when Tom had really on hard times, Mick was the one who was trying to rally the troops into having sort of a charity event on his behalf and things like that, which never really happened. But Mick being Mick were wanting to do all that. So I got in touch with him because there were a couple of stories that I'd heard of that I didn't know enough detail on, and one of them being that when Davey had really hit on hard times and they were in the hospital with a bad staph infection, Mick went to see him, and that were effectively the day when Davey re-signed for the WWF in 1999. And it was Mick and Owen that sort of perked him up from this slump that he were in, both physically and mentally, and managed to get him re-signed with Vince, which was unthinkable after what had happened with it in Montreal, like 18 months earlier. So I wanted to know a bit more about that, and he pointed me in the right direction. I didn't know I've read most of what Mick's done, but the one that I'd sort of missed out on, or one of the couple of books of his that I'd missed out on, were the Hardcore Diaries. And he said, "It's a lot. Feel free to use as much of my work as you want, but just so you know, the story that you're asking me about is heavily featured in Hardcore Diaries." So downloaded that book, and sure enough, I quickly had some brilliant quotes to use. So yeah, Mick were great as well.
That's awesome, man. Foley is God. Like, Foley's probably top 10 for me of all time, along with most of the Hart Foundation. But this has been a good episode. I think you can tell that I'm massive. Not just Dynamite, not just Bulldog, but the Hart family in general. Like, I love the family. Fun fact, I have an Owen Hart tattoo.
Really?
Yep. Not like a portrait of him, but just his boot.
Dare I ask where?
It's on my arm. So it's basically his boot, not the King of Hearts logo, but a rocket. So WrestleMania 10, because Bret versus Owen, probably my favourite match of all time.
Yeah, understandably. And here's a fun fact for you then, a little exclusive. That match, Davey Boy was watching that match in his mum and dad's home in Golborne. He was touring the UK at the time after he'd been fired by not only WWF at the end of 92, but also WCW at the end of 93. That match happened at WrestleMania 10 in 1994. And that was the day he turned to Diana and said, "I need to get back. I can't watch them tear the house down like that while I'm in wrestling round sort of bingo halls in the UK." I'm going back, and so then by SummerSlam, he made his return.
I love that, man. I did not know that at all. Didn't have a clue. It's really annoying, right? Because we've been like having a really good chat for about an hour, and a part of me just still wants to ask more questions about the book. But at the same time, I think I'm just going to have patience. Like, I feel like a kid around Christmas at the moment because I'm fascinated by the Hart family. I've read, I think we had a conversation earlier about Bret Hart's book being the best wrestling book of all time. I mean, if you agree with that, that's great. If you're listening to this, if not, put in the comments below what is your favorite book, or mention some of your other favorite books, because I think Bret's mostly gets featured as at least top 3.
Yeah, I think Bret and Mick's, and it's difficult to argue with either of them. I think Bret and Mick's are my favourites. So, and one of the things that I love about Mick's also is that it is actually a WWF production. I don't know if you've heard him talk about it, but he submitted it to the publisher, and they basically wanted to tear it in half. They wanted to get rid of half of it. Mostly just because they felt it was too long to be a wrestling book, as we've discussed. Most of them are 200 or 300 pages.
Yeah.
It's epic, a bit like Bret's is. They wanted to get rid of most of it, but I dare say, and I'm only speculating here, but I dare say, given the fact it was going through the WWF production machine, I dare say a lot of the stuff that they'd got rid of would have been the more controversial stuff, and they'd have maybe put a bit of a polish on it. And he said no. He said no. That's it. He'd handwritten it while they were on the road. And he said, no, that's it. He said, I'll let you sort of edit it, but I'm not letting you rip it limb from limb. And so that's why it stayed as intact and as long and detailed.
Because it's so, like, the truth is just there. There are a few books, like the Hardy Boys and Goldust, where you can just tell they have just stripped it so much, and, it filtered it.
Stone Cold's as well, I was really looking forward to that, and I do think it's still good, it's still interesting to read, but it just almost leaves you with as many questions as it does answers.
Absolutely. There's a few books, I think, underrated ones, like Hardcore Holly's book. I was surprised how good it was. That was obviously a non-WWE book, but I was like, obviously he hates Jeff Jarrett, it's really funny, but I was like, I actually really like Hardcore Holly now.
Well, I don't know if you've listened to any of it, but Conrad Thompson generally puts quotes from Bob Holly's book to Jeff Jarrett on the podcast, because
I haven't listened to that one yet.
Obviously, you don't come out of it looking very well. But yeah, again, I do think the better ones in general are the ones that aren't WWF affiliated, because They've just sort of the ones that have got a little bit of an agenda, if you like. They're not completely free to write what they want. I don't think.
I remember Batista in his book. He had to fight to basically feature and include a Benoit story. Like he had to fight for that. I mean, that's one time I do understand why they didn't want to have him in it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I know we're going on a bit of a segue, but what baffles me is on Network, and I will like the general assumption or general knowledge is that they've sort of wiped Benoit out of everything. But they haven't. Every match of his is still on there on the network. All they do is
you just can't search him. His name is like no results.
It just says it'll just say like the British Bulldog versus our wrestler or something like that.
Yeah.
But then when you actually put it on it, the commentators are calling him by his name. So I find it very sort of odd how they've managed to claim to the world that wiped him out of everything. But Ian, it's still there. And in terms of pure wrestling, I do think he should still be there. But it just feels a little bit like they're trying to get the best of both worlds, if you like. They want to claim that they've.
There was so much that he did. Like it's a very touchy subject. Like not everyone likes to hear it. I'm with you. I can watch a Benoit match and I'll just watch it for the match. But as a person, I absolutely despise what he did. I think he's a despicable human being and he should have been in the Hall of Fame because there are people still out there who say he should be in the Hall of Fame. But I think I
just think that's a ridiculous comment.
It's on Twitter. You still see it, mate?
Oh yeah. Oh no, I don't. No, I don't mean yours. I mean people who say that is the.
Oh yeah.
I just think. Can you imagine the reaction or how much that would overshadow anything else that were going on at that time? You know what I mean?
Well, I do feel bad though for Nancy Benoit or Nancy Sullivan. I'll call her the woman. It's the fact that her career, in a way, has been washed away and erased. And she's been forgotten about.
Right.
And I feel,
you're absolutely right. She was so pioneering for women's wrestling in that in the
90s, definitely. Yeah.
That you feel like if she wasn't so ingrained with what happened, that she would probably be in the Hall of Fame herself.
It's a real shame.
It is obviously the whole thing about it's a shame. It's such a
but I mean, like her career, her achievements, all done because of what he did. But I feel like have you ever heard her sister? I can't remember her name. Talk about her, Nancy and her career and what happened, and like she's really interesting to listen to.
Is it the same sister that was heavily featured on the Dark Side episode?
Yes, I cannot remember her name. Forgot now.
She is. Yeah, I can't think of her name as I mentioned now, but she is. She obviously. You can tell that she's still obviously torn apart by it all, and she comes across really well and
really well. Listen to her on Talk of Jericho, and I'm just like such a brave woman.
Yeah, but it needs that, as we've just said. Like Nancy's side of it sort of gets washed over a little bit because of everything that's happened. So it does need people like Chris Jericho to sort of feature that quite heavily. But I mean,
he does a really good job, Jericho, when it comes to that sort of stuff. Really good job.
He's got such a big reach and such a big following that I think he's not afraid of the controversy, and because I think AEW as opposed to the WWF give them that freedom to go and do their own thing, cover the more controversial stuff, be themselves and do what they want, even as far as going and wrestling for other promotions. You know what I mean? I think that's what people are really warming to them for. They don't feel like they're just sort of ring fencing the talent and sort of oppressing them, if you like. And he does a brilliant job with all that and uses his influence and his reach in the right way, I think.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I just wish he would stop mentioning Fozzy in his books because his books are brilliant. Then you get like, Fozzy talk. Skip. Sorry, just squeeze it in.
As much as he loves wrestling and as much of a fantastic wrestler as he is, he does still only want to be a rock star.
I know. He's on tour in the UK at the moment. I was just like, my mate's like, do you want to go? Nah, you're right. If it was wrestling or something, like AEW, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. Do you go see Fozzy? Nah, I'm busy. Doing what?
He does the cruises, doesn't he? The Fozzy cruises and stuff.
Mate, I couldn't do that. I just could not do it. Like, I'm a wrestling fan, you're a wrestling fan, but for 3 days, listen to Fozzy. I can't do it. Being surrounded by like AEW fans, not for me.
You can tell that's what he wants to be deep down. But yeah, you can't blame
He's
him.
never going to give up with the rock star stuff, is he?
Part-time wrestler, part-time rock star. Fair play to him.
Fair. Oh, absolutely, man. Jericho's one of my favorites of all time. As a wrestler, mate, top 5, maybe top 10. Like,
yeah,
just probably behind Foley.
In terms of longevity and achievements, yeah, undoubtedly, I think you'd have to say top 10.
Yeah, but in terms of his like rock career, like we'll just end that conversation.
Yeah, but yeah, going back to people who aren't in Hall of Fame, obviously it's an issue in the book with Dynamite not being in there, and also with your tattoo. I really don't like the fact that Owen Hart in there. I mean, I think it kind of makes a mockery of the Hall of Fame. I think, and I know the issue is why, and I know that Martha's got a sort of moral stance in terms of why he shouldn't be in there and why they shouldn't be able to almost profit.
See, my tune's changed on that. I used to be like the biggest advocate of Owen being in the Hall of Fame. Oh, why is he not in the video games or has his own merch and getting his career celebrated by wrestling fans who still miss him? And then I did like my research and listened to more of what Martha had to say, read up on her and what actually happened. And then Darkseid came out. Then I was just like, do you know what? I stand by that woman. I stand by her and the family. Why she doesn't want him anywhere near it. And she said like she forgives him. I think that's all they need to know, and I respect that because when you properly go, we won't have a full-blown conversation about it because it's actually it's really, really sad. If anyone's not, it does get proper deep. I mean, if anyone wants to go out there, it's out there. So we have to go literally Google Martha Hart, Hall of Fame, Owen Hart, etc., etc. But I like what AEW's got in plan with Owen Hart, the Owen Hart tournament. We're going to get action figures. I don't care about action figures, but for Owen Hart, I will happily buy one. Happily, and display that bad boy.
Yeah, I do think that as an alternative, I just think that he deserves to be, and I don't want to use the word remember because everybody does remember and everybody remembers him so fondly, but he deserves to be current, I think, and in the way that most of them have something, be it an Hall of Fame ceremony or
I don't want just the full the night.
Probably going to get that through AEW, and I just hope they involve the right people.
And they'll be able to use like footage of him in Japan and stuff and use pictures. Obviously, they won't be able to use WWE footage, but they can work around it and they can celebrate his life, which it's been too damn long.
Yeah, I think so. Some brilliantly produced and professional montages and stuff like that. The things that you get when somebody's, for example, being inducted into the Hall of Fame. We need something new like that, I think, for Owen. So hopefully we're going to get it.
Oh man, I can't wait. So I'm just going to ask a few more questions and then I'll let you enjoy your evening. I have to say afternoon in the morning because we're in the same time zone. Happy days, makes things a bit easier. So we've discussed in detail about the book, but I just want to ask a few more questions about you being an author as well. Want to get some insight because I think the listeners will want to hear that. How would you overcome writer's block?
Oh, it's something that I haven't come across yet, but I've only not come across it, I think, because I've immersed myself in projects that I'm so passionate about, and I think that's what it's all about. I think if somebody is a professional writer, especially of something like novels, maybe, I can absolutely see why there's so much pressure on having your next idea or putting your next thing, putting next pen to paper when your livelihood depends on it. Whereas what I've done is immerse myself as sort of a part-time, almost an hobby that's turning into a career now. Immerse myself in projects that I'm so passionate about. All I can think about while I'm doing pretty much anything else is, right, the next thing that I'm going to move on to is this chapter, this section. The next thing I'm going to research is about this bit. I can't wait to get on to research about that bit. But I have found it so far, I'll be brutally honest, I have found it impossible to have writer's block about the subjects that I've fallen into. But I think that's just because it's not, there's no pressure on me to produce something out of nothing. Everything is already out there somewhere, and I know it is. All I need to do is find it, be be it on the internet, be it in other people's books, be it by finding somebody who does know about it because they're there. So yeah, I've always found myself with somebody to turn to, or a book to turn to, or the internet to turn to, which has given me my sort of next, my next chapter, my next little story, my next piece that I want to write about.
Awesome, my man. Well, I actually asked about your favourite British Bulldog match, but I actually forgot to ask your favourite Dynamite Kid match.
Favorite Dynamite Kid match? Yeah, well, I think the obvious answers are obviously ones with Tiger Mask, which are just so groundbreaking, so brilliant. But my favourite one is actually is one of his first matches against a Japanese headliner, but it took place in Calgary. It took place in Stampede. It's against Tatsumi Fujinami for the, as it were at the time, of the WWF Junior Heavyweight title. They've gone on a tour. He's having a bit of work issue visas. We actually get into Japan at that time, and he's got multiple promotions, even the smaller promotions, sort of fighting for him. So he's unclear about who he's going to go to. So there's a bit of complications with all that. But then New Japan do a tour of US and Canada, the US and Canadian territories. So when they come through Stampede, they want Fujinami to put his WWF Junior Heavyweight title on the line against Dynamite. And they absolutely tear the house down. It's absolutely phenomenal. And that is the match that made the Japanese audience and the Japanese bookers, particularly the New Japan bookers, say, right, get him on the next plane over here. And then ultimately he turns into the man that they put in with Tiger Mask to get Tiger Mask over to the absolute maximum that he can. And then when Tiger Mask goes into semi-retirement and vacates the belt, Dynamite is the man. And that would lead to, if it weren't such a short match, when he actually wins the WWF Junior Heavyweight title, finally, 5 years after first challenging for it, he does it in a tournament where he beats Davey Boy in the semi-final and injures his back so badly. And that is where his real back problem started, when he injured his back that night, when he finally, he wrestles through the pain barrier. No man alive should have been able to even walk, let alone carry on wrestling another match, when he beat the Cobra in the final. And it's like a brilliant 5 year story from the first time he challenged for that title to actually winning it 5 years later and going through all that agony. I detail it quite heavily in the book, yeah. But it's just, I think that first match blows everybody away so much to culminate 5 years later on this sort of famous night in Tokyo. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Ah, wicked, man. I think mine's probably the match against Tiger Mask, or there's a match he had with Macho Man. It's in the King of the Ring tournament.
Yeah. It's in. It's on the Wrestling Classic in.
Things like 86, isn't it?
Yeah, they just have like a one-off tournament as a pay-per-view. Yeah,
it's not a long match, but it's so good.
Because they've got to cram all these matches in, obviously in a tournament format. They've got to cram all these matches in into the one night, so they're all pretty short matches. But it's as if they've made this decision, him and Randy at the time being two of the top workers in the world. Right, we've only been given 5 minutes, but let's make it absolutely the best 5 minutes you can imagine. And yeah, it steals the show.
Ah, superb, man. That's awesome. Last question, and I'll let you go, Stephen. What can the readers expect from reading this upcoming book? So we've talked about the content, we've talked about who you've reached out to, we've talked about what's involved and what inspired you to write it. But as a reader, what can they expect?
I think real exclusives that nobody knows or has heard or seen before is one of the things that I'm most proud of. I've had a couple of people, Twitter being Twitter, challenge me and say, well, it's all been done before. What are you bringing to the table?
Really?
Oh, yeah, as you can imagine.
Fuck 'em.
Absolutely no doubt in my mind. There is going to be an awful lot in this book that nobody's ever read before, and I am quite proud of my style. I do it in quite a dramatic and descriptive way, where I sort of create scenes.
So how many books have you published, by the way? Is it 3?
This is my 3rd, yeah.
Third one, okay.
So yeah, it's not just going to be and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. You'll find an awful lot of detail, an awful lot of drama, and matches gone into real detail that you probably didn't even know existed. Matches that they had against people that you didn't know they'd ever been in the ring with, gone into real detail. I honestly believe that not one person will be disappointed when they finish this book.
I can't wait, mate. I honestly can't. And I'm not just saying that because I'm speaking to you right now, and I've had Bronwyn as a guest before, and George Smith, and the fact that I absolutely adore that entire family. But I can just tell it's going to be a good book. Where can the listeners find you on social media, Stephen?
On social media, I am Stephen_Bell1985 on Twitter. But I've also got a dedicated Twitter page for the book, which is at Bulldogs Book 123. I've got a website set up which you can get all my books so far and place a pre-order for Dynamite and Davey. That's stephenbellwrites.com. And yeah, there's even, for those who don't like social media or anything like that, there's even an eBay page set up so you can place your pre-orders there too, which, you know, a quick search and you'll find it pretty quickly, I'd have thought.
Awesome. Stephen, thank you for coming on. Like, it's been a really good conversation. I thought I could have had a bit longer, but I didn't want to. A part of me was just going to literally try and pick your brain about the book because I just want to know more now. And I don't think that's fair for the consumers and myself. I think I'm just going to have to wait, basically, because I like to feel like I know everything. But I'm sure.
I love talking about it, George. It's been a brilliant conversation over an hour. Just flown by. So thanks for that.
Nah, no problem at all. For everyone that's listened to this episode, there's going to be more episodes of What You Call It podcast coming out soon. But for now, everyone, have a brilliant week. And also, I hope Arsenal get 3 points against Man United. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's time for What Do You Call It? Podcast.
The following podcast is brought to you by the Johners Podcasting Network, found exclusively at wrestlingwithjohners.com.